basically the whole real estate gamut, all within about a half an hour drive here.
Yeah.
I know that parts of North Charleston are basically your perfect renting type properties. And then we have, south of Broad, and you've got $23 million properties.
Right.
And they're literally about 10 minutes apart on a drive, less than 5 miles from each other. And I think that's very good for us as investors, because in the changing economies, which we know is going to come, we talk about this in our mastermind group.
Sure.
How, it's going to turn. It probably, who knows when. Could be a year, could be 3 years, but it's been kind of a bull market here, even in the real estate world, for at least in Charleston, for since about 2012, wouldn't you say? 2011, 2012, it's really started to kind of take off. 2013.
Yeah, slowly, but it's accelerated quite a bit in the last 2 years.
But I think that the fact that it is such a diversified economy, and you can buy the cash flowing rentals, but you can also, you've got $1 million or $500,000 fix and flip potential.
Sure.
Or owner occupied, I think is good. What was I going to ask you? Okay, so
talking about, let me speak to that fragmented market.
Please do. Let me hear what you think.
Natalie
about
and I belong to a national mastermind.
That's right.
And then we have our local mastermind. So at the national mastermind, it's really interesting to talk to people from California, from Texas, from Indiana, from Macon, Georgia, which is a very small town. Yeah. And the fact, as you mentioned, Robbie, that Charleston has, we can buy a perfectly livable, move-in ready property for $25,000 to $45,000 sometimes.
Yeah.
And my friends from New York and Montreal, and that, they said a property that's falling into the ground is $150,000.
Yeah.
So they can't even understand those numbers, where the guys in Texas and Indiana buy $25,000 livable properties every day of the week. So the interesting thing is that we have that market, and then we have the bread and butter, $150,000 nice home in a nice neighborhood, and then we have the $500,000 segment and the $750,000 segment and the multi-million, all in this very small geographic area. As an investor in Charleston, I think it's critical to understand where the boundary lines are.
Right.
And when we run comps, I spend a lot of time training my assistant who's in the Philippines how to look at railroad tracks, highways, neighborhood boundaries, because the difference between the neighborhood on this side of the road and that side of the road can be $100,000, even if the houses seem very similar. And so it requires a lot of skill on the front end, I think.
Well, I think that brings up a good point, because I know have you done some business is it St. Louis?
We did not, but we have members of our mastermind in St. Louis.
Okay, and you're from St. Louis?
Natalie's from
St. Louis. That's what it is. Okay.
Yeah.
What I'm curious about is you hear a lot of folks talking about the virtual investing.
Sure.
And I think what you just brought up is a really good point, in that I think we know it's possible, but it's how you need local knowledge to be able to differentiate things like that.
Sure.
And do you think, for you, are you going to continue to stay in this market, you think, regardless? Or are you looking to get into other markets? And if so, I guess, what kinds of markets do you think you'd be looking for if you did expand into other markets?
Well, I'll answer your question first, and then that brings up another comment. Definitely long-term looking at doing some wholesale business and maybe some flips in Charlotte or Atlanta. Just because of the population. Charleston's a very small town, and there are only so many properties here, and it's so segmented or fragmented that there are only so many in each category. So in order to grow, we do need to look to other areas, and it doesn't really make sense to go to another small town. So we would look at a big city.
Yeah, population.
From the flip side, Robbie, you and I have a mutual friend from Oregon who invests heavily in Charleston, at absolutely as far as he could be from home without leaving the U.S. But he, has he has me, he has a great realtor, he has a great contractor here in Charleston who can look at it street by street and property by property and condition by condition, and then feed him reliable information so he can make good decisions. So that's the key. When I go into other markets, I'm going to look for the team that he has built here in Charleston. And, for anybody listening, Robbie and I are assets. If you're interested in Charleston,
definitely.
We have very different skill sets, but we complement each other.
I agree. And I think you're right. So on that team, as you're assembling a team, who do you think, I'm going to make the plug for the property manager because as you know, I like the rental properties for the most part. Sure. But in addition to a property manager, I guess, who do you think, a realtor?
Yep.
You'd be looking for a realtor.
Yeah, definitely a local realtor who understands the needs of investors.
Yeah.
There are so many realtors who do a fantastic job in helping me find a home to live in, or anyone find a home to live in, or sell a home, but don't necessarily understand how an investor works, what an investor needs. And there are some realtors who understand that intimately. Yeah. So finding the right realtor, I think having, and it's personal opinion, but I like a general contractor who handles all aspects of construction, especially if you're working from afar, having somebody who's skilled and reliable.
So you like contract. And that brings up a good point, because I know there's, again, whether it's fix and flip, usually fix and flip world, but buy and hold also, some folks love to hire the subs themselves.
Absolutely.
And then some love to have a GC involved, a general contractor.
Right.
And so you're saying you prefer the general contractor model because they are responsible for finding all those individual people. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. And I'm careful with that because, Robbie, you and I have some mutual friends who do it the other way and are very successful. Yeah. And I think that really comes down to what you like and what you're comfortable with. Yeah. And our friends who do it, who sub things out themselves, they don't pay a general contractor, so there's probably a little cost savings. But I know when I'm in Lowe's or Home Depot, I'm bound to see one of these other investors because they spend their days running materials and chasing subs, which if you enjoy that, and some people enjoy it, great. I did it for 23 years. I don't want to chase subs and materials anymore.
No, I think and I know that you and I have a similar mindset in the concept of creating a reproducible business that's scalable. And I think that the challenge, anything that requires your touch makes it harder to scale, I guess, is the concept. So I think that's good. And I know that being said, in our group, there have been guys that have had great experiences with contractors and horrible experiences as well. And I think, for those listening that are maybe newer in this world, what would you, that's a good point. That's an interesting question. What, to somebody that is interested in getting into real estate, whether it's a wholesaling or fix and flip or buy and rent, what would be your advice in terms of the contractor world? Because you're really intimately familiar with that role and vetting and all of that. What would you say some of the things to look out for, tips in vetting and finding a good one from and preventing? What are some tips on preventing disasters?
Sure. No, but sometimes that question's hard for me because I grew up in that world literally from childhood. So I sort of instinctively understand some of those things. At 8:00 this morning, I had coffee with a young investor who's just flipped his second house and is doing all the work himself and wants to get into hiring contractors. So I just had this conversation. I think, the 1 minute version is it's critical to me to know what things cost. If I'm going to put a roof on a 1,200 square foot house with 30-year architectural shingles, I know exactly what that should cost. So when I hire someone to do that work, I don't ask for a quote. I tell him exactly what I expect that to cost. And would he like to do the work or not? Same thing goes for plumbing and electrical and painting. And it would take way too much time for this discussion, but there are ways to learn. And one of the ways to learn is by getting quotes initially, but then understanding how each individual subcontractor calculates what they're quoting you, because it'll vary wildly. And it varies very subjectively. With having worked as a remodeler, I might do a kitchen renovation for $18,000 this month, and 3 months from now, I might be so busy I'd want to charge $30,000 for the same job. It's not fair. It's not
supply and demand.
It's supply and demand.
Yeah.
So it's very important, I think, as an investor to understand, what does painting cost? What does replacing an electrical panel cost? What does it really cost to get it done professionally with permits, by the book? But what's the real cost? Because those things become very subjective. And I've watched a lot of my investor friends spend a lot of money, waste a lot of time, and sometimes be defrauded by contractors.
Yeah. I've seen it too. Yeah. Brutal.
It's one of those things that can really be prevented with some documentation and some discussion and some control on the front end. And the beautiful thing is, for us, we've formed relationships with a couple of general contractors where we maintain those safeguards and those controls, but there's a great degree of trust.
Right. You've done
over
enough.
Time.
Yeah. Not your first project.
Right.
Yeah, I think on a small scale, I'll tell you, it's just so funny too. I deal with a lot more like handyman type folks because of the nature of the rentals and stuff. You're needing small little repairs here and there. And I have, my main guys that I go to, but, I got a call out of the blue a couple of days ago from a guy I'd never met before, but he's a neighbor of one of my tenants. And he's like, hey, I heard you're shorthanded and needed help doing a project. It's called Cool Seal on mobile homes. They have a rubber coating that goes on the metal roofs, the metal roof style, and they roll it on. It's a pretty simple procedure and cheap. And I know exactly, just like what you said. I've done it hundreds of times.
You know what it costs.
I know what it costs. The product is, shouldn't be more than around $100. Although, of course, he upsold me, convinced me that there's a new product out that I'm going to try this time. It's $200. And it should take a decent person, about 2 hours to do this job. Simple job, right?
Right.
So I ask him, well, okay, what are you looking to get for it? What do you want? I know what the materials cost, so what do you want for your labor? And he's like, well, $150. I said, okay, well, what do you make hourly? What do you normally charge hourly? Well, $18 an hour. So I said, well, so are you saying this is going to take you, 10 hours, 9 or 10 hours to do this job? No, man, I'll have it done in 2 hours. So I said, well, I don't understand. You're kind of losing me here. You're going to charge me $150, but you work at $18 an hour, So anyhow, we ended up settling on $60 an hour. But I think that's one of those things where, as a new investor, you deal with that. And he's not trying to swindle me. Everybody's just trying to make a buck, like you said.
Sure.
But then again, that's a very, very small example. But I deal with those conversations dozens of times per day. It seems like.
Right.
And I think the new investors may not, know to kind of the questions to ask. But I think it all goes back to what you're talking about, is knowing, and that just comes from practice, I guess, but knowing what to expect things to cost.
Well, it's you'll begin with the end in mind.
Right.
You begin with the end in mind. And there's how much is it going to cost? How long will it take? What's it going to look like when it's finished? And will it actually get done?
Right.
And all of those things can be controlled. And one of the ways to control it is withholding a percentage of the payment until it's done and inspected and we know it's right.
Yeah.
And, we treat our contractors very fairly. Yeah. And they come back to us over and over and over again. Once we've established the relationship that, they're the right person and we're the right person for them to work with.
Okay, Russ. So one of the things I think you and I have talked a little bit about in the past, but I'd love to hear more about is, I know you read a lot. And one of the things that this show's about, which, I'm mentioning this is, and you're my first man. So you're my first interview. So this is awesome. And we're still, getting our feet underneath us, but balance, systems, and freedom are the main kind of mantra that I'm looking for. But in that, one of the guys that I've learned a lot from is Tony Robbins, and he talks a lot about beliefs and mindset separating people, that before we just do actions and we're not just reacting to life, but the people who succeed, there's something different about them, that the thoughts in their mind. So I guess, could you tell me a little bit about, are there beliefs that you have that either you've always had or that you feel like you're evolving on, that you tell yourself or that you think that have enabled you to be successful in business and life, whereas maybe some of the other folks that we know that have maybe tried this industry have not succeeded? What do you think? Are there any thoughts in your mind that you can think of that you've either had for a long time or recently that would make you feel that way?
Yeah, I would say that nearly all of it is recent.
Okay. Interesting.
I guess the most important belief for me is that I get what I decide and that I have to make a decision. And to me, that's a commitment to go in a certain direction. So I give a lot of credit to Natalie, my wife, who was raised with a great sense of gratitude and a great sense of optimism. And that has really influenced me tremendously. She also lives in abundance, which I think is very powerful. So I have made a decision to learn to live in abundance and to learn to be optimistic and to leave perfectionism